In 2008, during the Beijing Olympics, New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote a column extolling China's advancements during the previous decade. In the op-ed entitled "A Biblical 7 Years," Friedman wrote, "As I sat in my seat at the bird's nest, watching thousands of Chinese dancers, drummers, singers, and acrobats on stilts perform their magic at the closing ceremony, I couldn't help but reflect on how China and America have spent the last 7 years. China has been preparing for the Olympics. We've been preparing for Al-Qaeda. They've been building better stadiums, subways, airports, roads, and parks, and we've been building better metal detectors, armed Humvees, and pilotless drones. Then ask yourself, who is living in the third world country? Yes, if you drive an hour out of Beijing, you meet the vast, dirt-poor third world of China. But here's what's new. The rich parts of China, the modern parts of Beijing or Shanghai or Dalian, are now more state-of-the-art than rich America. The buildings are architecturally more interesting, the wireless networks more sophisticated, the roads and trains more efficient and nicer, and I repeat, they did not get all this by discovering oil, they got it by digging inside themselves." That was in 2008. But 12 years later, Friedman, a well-known neoliberal propagandist, has changed his tune. While in 2008, Friedman marveled at China's transformation, today he has joined the chorus of China's critics, stating that China went too far on a broad range of issues. Then he launches into a litany of complaints, which are almost taken verbatim from Republican anti-China talking points. In a recent op-ed for Fox News, Daniel Hoffman, an arch anti-China conservative, likewise cataloged a long list of China's transgressions. Let's compare what they had to say. Hoffman: China is militarizing the South China Sea. Friedman: China has become more aggressive in projecting its power into the South China Sea. Hoffman: China is stealing our intellectual property as well as military and trade secrets. Friedman: U.S. companies thought they had enough market share inside China that they would tolerate the stealing of intellectual property and other trade abuses China engaged in. Hoffman: China's willful effort to conceal the outbreak and severity of the coronavirus while rejecting any sort of transparent collaboration against this global pandemic. Friedman: China hammered countries that dared to ask for an independent inquiry into how the coronavirus emerged in Wuhan. Hoffman: China menaces Taiwan and democracy activists in Hong Kong. Friedman: China is imposing a new national security law to curtail long-standing freedoms in Hong Kong and stepped up its bullying of Taiwan. Hoffman: Xinjiang is notorious for its so-called re-education camps where China detains Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities against their will and violates their human rights. Friedman: China intensified its internment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Hoffman: China exploits its Belt and Road Initiative as cover for debt-trap diplomacy to project global influence. Friedman: China only has customers who fear its wrath. So, what has changed for Friedman in the last decade? Why has China gone from a country that should be looked on favorably and even emulated to one that meets with near universal opprobrium in the Western media across the political spectrum? Has China really changed that much, or is it the Western perception of China that has changed? China is no different than it was before. It is the U.S. that has become more aggressive, provoking China to take action. Obama's Asian pivot forced China to shore up its defenses in the South China Sea, long regarded as its sovereign territory. The same applies to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Xinjiang. China's policies in those areas are in reaction to U.S. attempts to challenge Chinese sovereignty in all three regions by supporting separatist forces bent on dismembering the PRC. As regards trade, China has undertaken reforms that have mitigated many Western complaints as it's moved up the value chain. The trade war initiated by Trump merely dredged up every alleged abuse the Chinese have been accused of in order to impose tariffs on Chinese imports, part of Trump's Make America Great Again campaign promise. And to put the icing on the cake, both Hoffman and Friedman repeat the false narrative that China somehow concealed and covered up the origin and spread of COVID-19 when the evidence is there for all to see that it did nothing of the sort. In fact, it was the West that botched up its own response to the pandemic, not China. So why Friedman's change of heart? The reason is simple: China's successes and the West's failures. Since 2008, China has gone from one success story to another. It's taking the lead in science and technology, deployed an e-commerce ecosystem that far surpasses anything in the U.S. or elsewhere, is solving its many internal problems such as poverty alleviation and environmental degradation, establishing a 21st century transportation network with more high-speed railways than the rest of the world combined, and spreading its knowledge and expertise to the rest of the developing world via its Belt and Road Initiative, all of which shows that China is picking up the mantle of world leadership dropped by the U.S. and its Western allies. China is rising while the West is declining, and the West is running scared, be it a neoliberal like Friedman or an arch-conservative like Hoffman. That is the real reason for the West's attempt to attack China from all sides. It is a desperate ploy that is bound to fail.